My name is AR DeClerck, and I am your panel moderator for today for the FantasyCon 2016 panel. The title of our panel is Limits and Liabilities, Writing for Genre and Reader Expectations, or Against Genre and Reader Expectations. I have three authors with me here today as my panelists, and we're going to go around the room and introduce everyone, talk about what kind of books we write, and then we will jump right into our topic discussion. As I said, my name's Amy R. DeClerck. I write as AR DeClerck. I'm an adventure romance novelist. I write in lots of subgenres, including science fiction, steampunk, fantasy, and occasionally a contemporary here or there. So I'll pass it on to our next author, who is Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Dahl, and I joined the panel because I am also all over the place as far as what I write. Right now I'm in the middle of a historical fantasy novel, but I have dabbled in just about everything, normally around historical topics, historical romance, historical fantasy. At some point I've been joking that I will do historical fiction, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. And so that is who I am at the moment.
Hey, on to you.
Did you say my name? I didn't hear it. RJ?
Yes, you're up next.
Yes, okay. RJ, all right, thank you. RJ Mirabal. I write what I call Southwest contemporary literature, which is set in the Southwest United States, specifically New Mexico, and it reads like an epic fantasy, other than the setting, which goes between the alternative fantasy setting. And I also have a strong interest in science fiction and in mystery. I have not published or written in those areas yet, but I read a lot of, and I have hopes of doing that.
My name is Sarah Burhman, and I mostly write in urban fantasy. I also write in science fiction, space opera science fiction, high fantasy, contemporary fantasy, paranormal romance, erotic paranormal romance, and children's books, and then nonfiction. So yeah, lots of genres, lots of things all over the place.
Well, that tells me that we have a good mix of authors here, but there's something in common for all of us, which is that we do like to cross those genre lines occasionally. So the title of our panel is Limits and Liabilities, and we're going to talk about what it's like to write within the confines or to find yourself going outside of the genre lines or reader expectation. So to start off the discussion, let's talk a little bit about the genres that we write. How do you feel reader expectation drives your writing? Do you write to make your readers happy, or do you write to tell the story?
Well, if I can start it off, I write mainly for myself, and I just hope that the readers are with me. One of the things that I've always enjoyed is something that's kind of off-road. It's not the typical, it's not what you expect. What I've written is like a fantasy series, almost like a J.R.R. Tolkien traditional fantasy, and yet it's set in a Southwest setting, which kind of throws things off. And then I like to, of course, mix in psychology and other elements. But I found that that makes it interesting for me, and then I hope that the reader then will find it interesting to them, because of my interest and my knowledge of the area. And so as a result, I feel like I can write very knowledgeably about the setting and the atmosphere and a lot of the details of the story.
For me personally, I have also I just started writing because I was interested in what I was writing about, and I'm a very character-driven author, which is how I think I started more romancy side of things, which is very much you have a hero, you have a heroine, and you go from there. And I found moving into fantasy, especially historical fantasy, where people try to group me with the J.R.R. Tolkien, George R.R. Martins, that's not the kind of fantasy I'm writing. And so I have a really strange outcome where there are people who love it because they love that it's more character driven. I have people who hate it because they pick up the book and go, this isn't what I thought of when I was going to read a historical fantasy. What's all this character chick stuff? And so I'm not going to change who I am, I guess, because I started writing the books I wanted to read. But I also am sort of trying to keep in mind what is and isn't reviewing well, because of course also selling books is important along with the what I like about it. And so I end up in sort of this weird place where I don't want to change too much, but I'm also keeping in mind that I'm shifting into a very different realm of expectations doing historical fantasy.
I don't think that I actually write to a genre. I write the story, and then I figure out what the genre is for that story.
Amen.
But books as less of a, let's pick a genre thing, and more of a, I like these books, I like these books. What genre should I be looking for to get more of these kinds of books? A little bit secondary to me, and more of a just a categorization, like Dewey Decimal 0.20.
Pretty much a mix of all three of you. When I set out to write a story, I kind of know the basics. I know my characters. At that point, I don't know where the story is going to go, where it's going to end up, or what genre it will end up being. I do write for a small press, so I have people who are telling me, if you put this in this genre, it will sell better because it leans more this way or it leans more that way. At that point, I'm listening to the experts, and I'm letting them do what they want to do. There have been a couple of times where I've said, no, that can't possibly be right, because of the feel of the book. But I do feel sometimes that when readers pick up my novels, they are getting something that they were not expecting, because perhaps they're picking up a science fiction I'm reading my computer. They're picking up a science fiction romance novel, quote unquote, and there are paranormal elements, there are fantasy elements in these books, and they're like, oh, I wasn't really expecting that in something labeled science fiction romance. So I find that sometimes my readers are a bit surprised. However, the feedback that I get from my readers is that they appreciate that I kind of cross-pollinate genres sometimes, because it does open their eyes to other things that maybe they wouldn't have read before. So let's talk a little bit about selling books, because that was a point that we made before. When you are looking to put your book into a genre, how do you decide where it goes? Do you look at other books that are in that genre? Do you look at other authors who write books that you like, that you think your book is like? Tell us how you decide where books go and what readers or readerships would most likely appreciate your novels.
Well, for me, I'm also a small press author, and so a lot of it comes down to the marketing department going, well, we're going to aim this at a slightly older crowd than you were originally planning, where I have younger characters, so I was originally thinking maybe new adult or young adult or something, and they're like, well, really, we're just going to market it as adult because it has all different themes, and that's what's selling for our press right now. And since I do start out with just sort of writing what I like to write, I think I've sort of pushed that off my publisher a lot, where I know that it is about, I know that it's fantasy because obviously there's fantastical elements, but then I sort of let them guide it one way or the other as what they think the marketing, because they're the marketing people.
Yeah, now my experience is a little bit different. I work with an independent press, which basically I'm on my own. I do like what I've done, they will publish it. And what I found is sort of a reverse process. After I wrote it, I thought, okay, what genre is this? I mean, I knew it was fantasy to write fantasy, but to give it a different twist with the setting and some other elements of Southwestern culture and so on. But then I started to think, well, what else is this? And I kind of saw that, well, there's adventure, there's even a bit of romance in the story. There is certainly an urban element, but I like to call mine really rural, because it takes place out in the country, even the present day world, but it has urban elements where there's a certain part of the story that takes place in the modern day world. And so I kind of started figuring out the genre after I wrote it rather than before. And it's been kind of independent. I just kind of say, okay, this is the kind of story I like. I want to see if I can interest readers in this character and what's happening to them and so on, and then figure out the genre. I guess I could go back to the story and take out the fantasy elements and just make it a straight story, which to me would not be as much fun.
I actually on what genres and subgenres there were and what they actually meant, mostly because you always hear spec fic, and I was like, okay, so I gotta explain what this means, because nobody ever really seems to know exactly what that means. So I did a lot of research on that. I also found that I was being influenced as I was writing by a lot of books that I like, and so obviously they were being kind of genre influencing as well. So I liked a lot of urban fantasy. I ended up writing a very urban fantasy. I think in the end, though, I wrote the book that I wanted to write without really considering what the market wants. Primarily, and the author, I get to do that, but also because the market changes so much that what is popular when I start writing a book isn't going to be necessarily popular when I finish writing the book and get it published. And if you want to always write a book that's going to be something that people are finding very popular, probably stick with romance. That seems to be like the gold for marketing.
Right.
Well, yeah, romance goes off a very standard formula that you don't have when it comes to fantasy. Yeah. Like I said, hero meets heroine, and it ends up being happy at the end, where fantasy can go all over the darn place.
Mm-hmm. And everybody loves a good romance.
I wanted to bring up, because I am a romance author, I will tell you that I do not write within that formula. And so I've been termed a rule breaker or a renegade sometimes when it comes to romance novels. And I find that my readers say, oh my goodness, I can't believe you marketed this as a romance, because I thought for sure there was no happy ending. Or I never saw a romance where the couple weren't together for the first 2/3 of the book, but it really is a romance novel. And I like that ability to surprise people and say, oh, I know you don't think that this is a typical romance, but you may find it more satisfying because it's not the same old thing all the time. Boy meets girl, boy and girl go through some stuff, boy and girl end up together happily ever after. And those are good, and I love romance novels, but I want to convey something different. So that's, I think, something that the four of us have in common, is we're a little bit renegade when it comes to writing those stories that don't quite fit, in your typical puzzle. We might be that odd piece out. But I think that's good. I think that readers are looking for those novels. They just don't know they're looking for those novels yet. Do you guys find it difficult or unsatisfying at times when you see, and I know it happens to me, so that's why I'm asking, the standard novel is the one that's selling thousands and thousands of copies a day, and the non-typical novel kind of sits on the shelf and you just want to shake people and say, wake up, this is not the same thing, you know, read this, it's different. How do you get your message across to readers that you're not the same as everyone else? And have you been successful in doing that?
Well, when I'm usually at a signing or a book fair or something like that, I start out by asking, do you like to read fantasy? And many times I get the answer no. And I says, well, you might like this fantasy because, and then I point out all of the things about it that it doesn't have the typical things. And I find that it's fun to get people interested in the story that wouldn't normally be fantasy readers. And so then I kind of emphasize the other elements of the story that may appeal to them, whether it's about a psychological aspects of my main character or the adventure or maybe the culture and so on. And, you know, here in New Mexico, culture is a big thing because we have three distinct cultures that kind of coexist together, the Hispanic, the Native American, and the Anglo, as well as other smaller minority groups and so on. And so we have such a diverse group of people here that I've always taken that kind of approach of starting with fantasy. And if they say they like fantasy, then I say, well, you'll find this to be different. You know, this is not going to be the thing. Find that kind of fun, and it helps me convert a few people who have never read a fantasy before to have read mine. Say, well, I really like that. You know, I don't know if they'd like the regular fantasy, but they like mine.
Yeah, my approach lately has been trying to find people who like fiction that sort of branches across the genres I go to, like fantasy, but also like women's fiction or romance, or even more the paranormal fiction side of fantasy. Because if I'm going to the high fantasy people, they tend to get mine and be, this is sort of weird, I was expecting something entirely different. And you don't, and while I, when those people also like something they haven't experienced, it's really great when you can draw in people who tend to like X kind of fiction and say that this is a new genre that you can your way into almost, because you end up with, I like this and this is more like that, but it all sort of blends together and maybe I'll branch out more.
We're going to take a quick second because the meeting room for some reason did not give us the full time. So I'm going to close this one out, pause the recording, and then we'll jump into another meeting room in just a second. Okay? All right.
Sounds good.